All right, so I got some cool feedback already. I'm going to show you my studio. That'll be my first, like, this is what's going on up in Lo-Fi Baby Records, Lo-Fi Recordings kind of podcast or whatever this, I don't know what this is called, but that's what it's going to be. So I'm going to try to keep these brief, but they're definitely not going to be 1 minute. Anyway, I'll show you today, like, what my studio looks like, what I'm using, and how I make a beat. All right, so let's get the panning going here. So here's my set of mics. Got my little minion back there. Underneath here is just an SM57. Then my KRK monitors. I got Pennywise up there. There's a bunch of records that I've done over the years. Look, I'll even play a little tune for us while we're checking this out. There's my DAW. Oh, there's my Skull Guy. Pepe's Pizza. Hey, if you've never eaten Pepe's Pizza, ooh, it's good stuff. There's the hole for my Joe Meek. Very excited for that to come. Some clowns, squeak, right through there is all my good stuff. Got my masks. Here's all my guitar gear. Oop, couple guns. Hope that didn't offend anybody. Got my Tron guys, my Tsunami. See why I love Tsunami? And then this part's all my kids' gaming fish station. That's the cool side of the room. Ready? Spin. Wee. And you are listening to a new track that I'm working on right now called Raindrops. Okay, so let's get back into it now that you saw all that fun stuff. So basically, oh, you know, I didn't actually even show my horns, so hang on 1 second. There they are. So, raw brass trumpet. Yeehaw, big fat, giant, cool brass thing. And here's my Shilky 1040. Ooh, there it is. See all those handprints on it? Yeah, cool. Okay, I have a few other horns, but we'll stick with those two. Those are my primaries. That's what I basically record everything on. Although I have used the Thomann and the Blessing for quite a few things. That is my primary trumpet right there. Still got a few horns for sale. Some of them have gone already, but by all means, I'm on eBay and Reverb. Anyway, back to the studio and how I create beats. So this might be pretty unexciting for most of you. Because of the fact that I am a trained musician, which means nothing. It just means I went to school and I learned a lot about theory and chord structures and scales and things that work together. Very helpful stuff, but I'm all ear when it comes to what I do musically. So I think I'm sure influential that I have that background, but I don't actively think, what chord comes next? I like to play things that sound cool. And most of the time, I look for inspiration. I love Loop Cloud. I don't know if you've tried that, or I'm sure there's other sample player type things like that. But I love to find inspiration from Loop Cloud. That said, I'm a very E-flat concert pitch major trumpet player. That for some reason is a very comfortable scale for me to play in. So I write a lot of my tunes in E-flat. Just like how it sounds. It's a good range for the flugelhorn. You can go a couple octaves without having to really strain too much and lose that soft, fluffy vibe. Because anything kind of, above like a high C on a flugelhorn gets ridiculous. So I like to keep things, honestly below, in this case, A flat. That's a good spot for me, high A flat. Which is why you hear most of my songs have lower horn parts. But again, with the lo-fi, the approach is really not to be out in front with the trumpet. And if you listen to my back catalog, so some of the first stuff I put out like in 2018, you'll hear the trumpets are a lot louder. And over time, I've realized that it's really about the mix, moreover, than it is any one part that stands out, because you're trying to create a vibe. At least that's my interpretation of lo-fi. It's really all the elements that would have normally gone into a track that would be wrapped on top of without the wrap. So nothing is really supposed to stand out anyway. Now the term lo-fi for me is kind of a misnomer. Lo-fi, if you look up the definition, is really started, it's like indie pop. And it was, quite honestly, where I started in my musical endeavors back in the 80s, when we had 4-track recorders or 2-track reel-to-reels, where everything sounded like crap. It was lo-fi because you couldn't afford to go to a studio, or none of the computer stuff that exists today, it just didn't exist. So you had to make recordings the best you could using high bias cassette tapes and 4-track recorders, 8-track recorders onto cassette tape. So imagine how skinny and little your slice of that tape is if you've got 4 or 8 tracks on there. The fidelity was terrible. And of course, we didn't have all these great plugins. Nobody had money for all the analog gear unless you went to a real studio. So it was, for all intents and purposes, everything you did was lo-fi, simply because you didn't have the type of technology that we have today. That said, I honestly try to make my songs sound as good as they can. I'm not trying to make them sound lo-fi at all. What I'm trying to give them is texture and aesthetic and era, along with vibe. So, for example, when I do a bunch of horns together, one of the tricks that I like to use is I do a lot of bus mixing. I don't know if you know what that means, but it's taking like instruments and sending them not to the master out, but sending them to, in fact, a bus track that sums them together. And then you can apply effects to the whole as opposed to effects to the individual. So you get a more consistent sound from doing it that way, whereas I can have one compressor affect all of the horns the same way in unison and in complement of each other, rather than having 7 compressors all on each track. Now sometimes I will do that. That's called summing as well, because you get this stacked effect that kind of emulates even more of the analog, and I really have constrained myself to basically using analog plugins only, analog emulations. So I'm either using literal analog hardware, where I'm bouncing tracks and doing like reamping that you would do with guitars through the tube equipment that I have and the outboard gear I have. Or I'm using, in my opinion, really nice quality, high quality analog modeled plugins. There's a few I really enjoy that, but I think it's so subjective. There's no reason to call anything out specifically, because what you like will be highly specific to what you like as opposed to what I like. It doesn't matter. It's just the sound you're going for. But getting back to how I start, I honestly start, not most, but literally, well, not most, not everything. Almost everything I start in Loop Cloud. I like to find some kind of vibe or inspiration, even if it's just a little sound or a blip or something. And that interface is just so easy. That's another reason why I use Logic, because what I was finding is that some of the other DAWs, just the workflows were a little intrusive for me. And they got, honestly, in the way of my creative process. I'm not looking to spend a ton of time screwing around with editing this and tweaking that from a recording standpoint. I just want to get my part in there and then spend all my time on the mix using the plugins. But I don't want it to be hard to use. So a lot of these other DAWs that I tried were just difficult for me. So I've stuck with Logic for a number of years now. But yeah, I really do start a lot of my stuff in Loop Cloud with a sample. Now, that said, oftentimes, well, actually every time, I pull the sample into the DAW and then I replay it. Right, I'll play it on a keyboard, or I've never actually done that with horn parts, but actually that's a good idea. I mean, if I ever found a cool little melody or something like that, I could just drag it over and then just play it on the horn or double it on the horn. That would be cool. But I have done that with vocal parts, and I have done that with some drum loops. And I've done that with, definitely with piano and keyboard parts. Somebody will have a nice progression. And a lot of times you can chop that up pretty well in Loop Cloud, but I also like to bring it over because I have a huge arsenal of really nice VST instruments, as well as a Korg Minilog that does have that fat, crappy analog sound to it that I like to use on every production that I can. But again, it's a real piece of hardware, so you actually have to be able to play this stuff. The MIDI on it works, but it's not really, I use the MIDI for the automation. I don't record the thing MIDI. I record and then I'll screw with the knobs through the MIDI. So let me explain that better. I will record live via MIDI and then go back and replay it and then turn and twist knobs, because that's, hang on, let me show you what that thing looks like. I left this out. So this is the Korg Minilog. This is just like any other analog synth. It's their own unique thing. But it has, see all those knobs and toggles and switches and all that kind of stuff? You can use all that stuff on the fly. But it's hard to play and twist 7 knobs at the same time. So what I like to do is, there is MIDI on this. So I'll record these sounds through MIDI, then go back, and then I'll do my live kind of tweaking of the envelopes and the filters and things like that. Okay, so that explains how to do that with hardware stuff, if you have any hardware and want to do that. Otherwise, in a soft synth, it's the same thing with a VST. You just record it in as MIDI and then make your automation tweaks to it. And then what I like to do is, boy, I'm doing a lot of cutaways here. Hang on a sec. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Anyway, so what I was talking about is in here will be my Joe Meek SC2. And here is my Art Pro VLA2. Something to notice or know about the Pro VLA2 is that it's a tube staged compressor. And what that means is the preamp in here is the actual AT7 tube, which I've swapped out for Electro Harmonix tubes. The tubes that come with it, nothing wrong with them. They're a little gritty and a little harsh for my taste. And since you're really only driving it in the preamp stage, not in the compression stage, I switched them out for just a set of $30 tubes that are way better. So it's definitely worth the money to get a better quality tube in there. But what I'm doing is I'm coming out of the analog gear into the DAW, out of the DAW, back into the compressor, and then printing that back to another audio channel in the DAW, if that makes any sense to you. But in this case, just to be real clear, what this means is the preamp is the tube, not the compressor. So this is a solid state compressor. It's still hardware, and it still sounds great, and it's still running the signal through a single tube, or in this case, when it's in stereo mode, 2 tubes individually, but not stacked or in serial. It allows you to really get that analog kind of even more analog sound. And this thing was only like $350 plus the $30. So it's under $400 to get it to the state that I have it right now. Brand new. And I really like it. And I cannot wait to get the Joe Meek SC2 because that is in fact a real tube compressor, meaning that the compression happens within a tube as opposed to the Art unit that you're seeing there. The compression happens in solid state, which again is still analog. It's just not tube. Hence, the more than double price of the old Joe Meek unit that I just picked up. So I'm pretty excited to get that one in the mix, literally and figuratively. Okay, so now that we've gone through, I guess, the creativity piece for me, I don't know if it's because I'm old or what, but I never run out of creativity. And that's why I think Loop Cloud is really cool. Because if you ever run into like, well, what should I do? Man, I have, I don't know, close to 3 to 4 terabytes worth of data that I can pick through and listen to stuff and just get ideas that kind of inspire me. But truthfully, because I play guitar and bass and trumpet and flugelhorn, most everything that I do revolves around that. Even though I said earlier on that I don't focus on that in terms of making it stand out so you hear it more at this stage in my recordings, I still really kind of create my melodies around those instruments because they are the instruments that I'm legitimately playing. And I mean, like when I'm playing my keyboard, right here, my MPK 225, which I love this little guy. It's great. It has good feeling. I got a little pedal down there. Everything's jamming on this. But when I'm playing this, I'm playing it purely in MIDI. So while there's nothing wrong with that, that's just how you do software instruments. Again, I have an arsenal from Arturia. I've got, I don't know, probably like 50 soft synths. That some of them are just outstanding. So I use those to complement everything. So I'll find a key. And, again, here's my music background coming in. Because I'm playing instruments, I need to know the key I'm in because I play better in certain keys. Like I mentioned earlier, E flat, concert pitch E flat on the trumpet, on a B flat trumpet. That works better for me. And to keep in mind, that's a half step below what you would consider a C on the piano. So anyway, so I really enjoy doing it that way, coming up with an idea, but I also have some really cool like ripcord and some other cool MIDI After Effects where they construct some really, because I'm not a pianist at all. That's the one thing I'm not, right? Or well, I'm many things. There's a lot of things I'm not, but importantly, I'm not like a Hoffy Beats. I'm not like Jonas where I can just sit down at a piano and riff off and play all these amazing things. I have no skill like that at all. So I need all the help I can get when I'm constructing chords. Again, I know the theory and I understand what I'm looking for and what will work, but I really like to approach this from what sounds good. So a lot of times it's really nice to have some chords predefined for you that give you the opportunity to listen to that and go, wow, yeah, that's the vibe I'm going for. And then kind of construct off of that based on what they look like. So I do a lot of that kind of, I guess that would be like deadmau5 kind of programming where I know he literally writes in the step editor a lot of his chords. I don't do it that way, but I use other things that help create the chords that I just don't know how to play on the piano. And again, to get out of my own creative flaw there, or creative blocker, I'm not trying to sit at the piano for 3 hours and figure out a chord. I just want to have it play for me and then add it to the mix, because what I'm really focusing on is the guitar, bass, and trumpet, or flugelhorn, because that's my thing. So I don't know if this provided any insight for anyone, but from a creative standpoint, that's really how I begin every song. It starts in Loop Cloud. I kind of build it out there, trim it, cut it, clip it. I mean, I use that thing to the max in terms of getting things where I want them, drag all of it over to the DAW, and then any parts that I can redo in my own instruments, I do. So if there's a bass line I bring, a lot of times I'll double the bass line, so I'll play the real... Did I show my bass? Hang on. Let's go over and take a look. So, this is my Fender Elite Series Jazz bass. Oh man, what a beauty. So that is a killer bass. Ooh, really like that one a lot. So I use that on everything. With flat wound strings, mind you. And this is my 56 reissue Les Paul Gold Top Gibson. It's not a real 56, obviously, but it's got real P90s. It's an old guitar, so it's all hand wired. So it's all the real deal stuff. Very exciting to use, in my opinion. Anyway, so it's real noisy. If you've ever played P90 pickups, they're snarly and they're single coils, so they have that hum and they're noisy. But for clean jazz stuff, and I use well, here, let me show you. I use flat wound roto sound. Flat round roto sound. Anyway, those are my bass strings, and I use flat wounds on the guitar as well. I mean, basically this is jazz, so I'm looking for that real mellow, not a harsh. It feels nicer on your fingers. I'm not playing any rock or anything else with it, so that's kind of a typical jazz string. And what I was trying to avoid on the bass was all the noise, the string noise. When you slide your fingers around, and I play with a plectrum, a pick, when I play bass. And I have kind of a sponge underneath my string, so I use these old Motown tricks. So underneath the cap, I don't know if you can see it. I'll try to show it to you. Hang on a sec. It might be hard to show you this, but inside there. Oh, there it is. See it? See that yellow? Yeah. So I'm a real big fan of the Motown sound, the Motown bass sound. And what I learned was it's not only a flat string. Hang on, let me get situated here. Not only is it a flat wound string setup, but the original Fenders from that era came with, and so did the Strats, they came with underneath that cover, the bridge cover, the ashtray they call it, it actually had a dampener. That's what it was for. So that's why those guitars sounded like that. They kind of had like a muffled, muted sound, and it's a very different sound than if you palm mute it. So the modern way of doing that, because I can't afford like tens of thousands of dollars for an old bass like that would have that. And this bass is wonderful. It has electronics, and I mean it can do anything you want to do. So I made my own following some videos on YouTube where they show you how to do this, and they just literally take a sponge and shove it underneath the top, and it gives you just enough of kind of like. It's kind of like it's almost like a high shelf filter where it just kind of winds down any of the raspiness of the bass, and it just gives you this thuddy kind of thump, 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 kind of a bass sound. But you don't have to worry about palm muting or missing a palm mute or anything, because what I had found was I play a lot of rock guitar and stuff too, and that's fine, and muting in that is fine, but you have distortion and overdrive and stuff on those guitars, even the bass in that genre. So what was happening was if I'd be playing a line and I'd miss a note, palm muting, and it would just sound crappy. So I'm like, well, how are they doing this? These guys really that good? How are they muting it with these big caps on it? So just a little YouTubing, and lo and behold, that's exactly how it's done. There's a sponge. And I just got like a really nice grouting sponge, one of those dense sponges from Home Depot. It's just one of those big, do I even have it? Yeah, here, look. Let me grab it. It's this thing. Yeah. Right. I just sliced a piece off of it and stuck it under the top. And you're supposed to mount it from the top above the strings, not below them. So it's supposed to push down on the strings, not push up against them. So if you want to do that with your bass and try it out, it really does give a great tone. It hampers the sustain. It's perfect for what I'm doing because all the lo-fi stuff I do, the bass, for the most part, unless it's a walking bass, it really does follow the drums. And I like it to do that because I use the very traditional ducking technique that you would use to clip out all the music when the kick drum trigger hits. And I like to have the bass land on that so you get like a, you really get that pressure feel because I like to have real sub bass. Like I like the bass to sort of be heard, but more felt, if that makes any sense. So I want you to be able to, when you have your headphones on or you're listening to this, feel the bass in your chest and feel the pressure of the bass on your head, but not actually hear it playing, if that makes any sense. And what's a really cool effect is basically everything that's not the drums on my mixes goes to a bus called ducker, right? And all that is a compressor set up to do ducking, sidechain ducking, right? So what that means, if you don't know what that means, is you take the kick drum or some other trigger and you sidechain that to that bus channel, and every instrument that's routed to that bus, when the kick drum, for example, if that's my trigger is the kick drum, when the kick drum kicks, it completely silences out everything in that moment of time that's on that track. So you hear a kick, and what it does is it gets rid of all the music for that instant. So it goes boom, and it smushes the mix together. You can't see what I'm doing. I'm like animating it and smushing it. What it does is it makes room for your kick drum without having to turn the volume of your kick drum up because you're effectively removing the volume of every other instrument that's happening at the same time the kick drum is kicking. Does that make any sense? Anyway, look up ducking. It's a really, really cool effect. You hear it on a lot of EDM stuff as well, and it gives you that, it's what gives it that like pumping vibe on any track, really. It's a really nice, and you can be real aggressive with it or very subtle with it. I like to be very aggressive with it because I also have a bus that's loaded with ambiance effects like reverbs and delays and reflections and things like that to give space. So the nice thing is you'll get the music to clip down so the raw, unaffected tracks go to the bus that has the ducker gate on it and they get clipped out. But the nice thing is when you have another bus running that has the effects sends on it, right? You send your effects to your reverb and your delays and things like that from either the duct track sum or from each individual track, depending on how you're mixing it. The really cool thing is that it kind of fills in that space. So you don't get this jarring, like you hear the music, you just feel it. It's a perception thing. So again, everything is all about subtlety. And, you know, that leads me to probably the biggest tip I can provide anyone on this whole topic is the songwriting is great, but once you have a great song, honestly, spend the time in your DAW mixing this stuff. You can do so much more than what you might think you can do. So just taking samples and some of the keyboards and stuff that I said, you know, like for example, that Korg Minilog is mono. And unless you're playing bass, that sounds terrible. So you have to make that stereo. If you don't, you have to do that in your recording suite. Right? That's not something it does. It has a single mono out, you know, mono cable output on it. So you're not getting this big, fat, awesome stereo sound. You're getting this thick analog mono sound, even in poly mode. So it's important to, without question, get into your DAW and really understand your plugins and sit there and isolate each track and listen to what the compressor is doing. Listen to what the saturator is doing. Listen to what the imaging plugin that you have on there is doing. And man, I can't tell you how important EQ is. I left that out for so long, and I found some really nice EQ units that I like a lot, and I use them on everything. But man, does it make a difference. I mean, you don't think it does because a lot of this stuff, again, it's the collective of it. It's the compounding of all these things that make a difference. But when you try this out, go through, do your mix, and then turn off all your plugins and listen to the difference. Do an A/B of like, and it's startling how different. I'm not saying it's always better. I'm just saying how much different the aggregate of all the plugins that you're using really make your song a very different song, and sound different and have a different character and a different feel. So a lot of what I spend a huge amount of my time on is in the recording, the post-recording process. So the mixing and the mastering. Not even really so much the mastering, but really the mixing. The mastering for me is about just making sure nothing sounds too harsh and getting the levels right for streaming. That's really the majority of it. But I can do that, and I'm not diminishing mastering. That's still a lot of stuff chained together to get it to that point. But what I'm saying is that if you spend a lot of time on your mix and provide the master session the highest quality and best mix you can, the mastering session becomes a lot more user-friendly. So you don't have to spend as much time trying to fix things because there's nothing that needs to be fixed, or very little things need to be fixed. And you can really focus on, well, does it sound good mono stereo? Does it sound good at all frequencies? Does it sound good with, the dither, with the bitrate mappings and MP3 mode and all that kind of stuff is what I spend my time in mastering, and really just getting the LUFs correct. That's it. Just so that it sounds the best that it can on the streaming services when they put it through their algorithms of compression and whatever they're doing across the board. But it's I can't say it enough. Spend time on your mix. I'll have a song like this particular track is just waiting for some horn and guitar parts, but it's done otherwise. And it probably took me an hour to put the thing together from a song perspective, but it's been in my DAW for almost a week, being mixed and remixed and looked at in levels, and I come back to it and I listen to it in headphones and I listen to it through my KRK monitors, and then I'll listen to it, I'll do a mix, throw it on my phone, listen to it in my car, listen to it on my phone. That kind of thing is where I spend the majority of my time. So if you like the things that I do and you like the sound that I'm producing and creating, that's what I'm doing. And I don't know that there's a way that you can really cheat that and speed that process up. That being said, I have songs coming out every 2 to 3 weeks. So this isn't a slow process once you kind of get the cadence of it. But don't diminish the process. It would be my biggest takeaway. Spend the time that you need to spend it on these tracks and let them do their thing. And, on that, I'll kind of segue out with this newest track that I'm working on. This one's called Raindrops. You heard it earlier. I think it's really pretty. This limiter number 6 I've been playing around with, that's a really cool plugin. It's free. It doesn't really want to work on Mac because it's an untrusted developer. Like my vocal there. Listen to the subtlety though. Like, well, I'm going to skip ahead for a second. Oh no, I don't have to. It'll be here in a second. Just check this part out right here. When it comes in, can you hear my ducking? It's squeezing. Hear it? Squeeze, 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 squeeze. Yeah, this is like probably the worst tutorial you'll ever watch on anything, but a lot of subtleties going on here. But watch when we come in here. In this empty part, this little tiny thing here, watch. Just a nice little part, nice little pattern there. And that'll do it for today. Hey, if you like this, leave me a comment, because I'm trying something new here. I'm not sure if people dig what I'm doing from a speaking perspective or not, but I think this is maybe a new direction. And we'll fade away to Bob. How pretty. Thanks.